Reflections of a Russian Statesman by Konstantin Petrovich Pobyedonostseff. Chapter 10. Faith. On earth we walk by faith and not by sight, and he is mistaken greatly who thinks that having extinguished faith in himself, he can walk thenceforth by sight alone. However high the human mind has risen above the world, it cannot rid itself of the soul, which aspires to belief, and to unconditional belief. For without belief, man cannot live. And is not that a pitiable delusion, which, rejecting faith in that which exists, and that which is revealed to the soul as real truth, accepts the theory and the formula as objects of faith, of honor, and of adoration, as idols to which men sacrifice themselves, the whole world in their souls, their freedom, and that of their neighbors. Theories and formulas cannot in themselves embrace the absolute, and each is of necessity incomplete, questionable, conditional, and false. That which is infinitely above me, from which ages was and is, which is infinite and immutable, which I cannot comprehend, but which comprehends and sustains me, in that I wish to believe as absolute truth, not in the work of my hands, the creations of my mind, or the logical formulas of my thought. The infinity of the universe and the principles of life cannot be expressed by any logical formula. The unhappy man who relies on such formulas to cross the chaos of existence will, with his wretched formula, be swallowed up by the chaos he defies. The recognition of an immortal self, faith is the only God, the consciousness of sin, the yearning for perfection, the sacrifice of love, the feeling of duty. These are the truths in which the soul may trust, not in the idols of formula and theory. What a mystery is the religious life of a people such as ours, uncultivated and left to itself. We ask, whence does it come, and strive to reach the source, yet find none. Our clergy teach little, and seldom they celebrate the service in the churches and direct the administration of the parishes. To the illiterate, the scriptures are unknown. There remain the church service and a few prayers which, transmitted from parents to children, serve as the only link between the church and its flock. It is known that in some remote districts the congregation understands nothing of the words of the service, or even of the Lord's Prayer, which is repeated often with omissions and additions which deprive it of all meaning. Nevertheless, in all these untutored minds has been raised, as in Athens, one knows not by whom, an altar to an unknown God. To all, the intervention of Providence in human affairs is a fact so indisputable, so firmly rooted in conscience, that when death arrives, these men, to whom none ever spoke of God, open their doors to him as a well-known and long-awaited guest. Thus, in the literal sense, they give their souls to God. In the beginning was the Word. Thus proclaims the Evangel. The great German poet wished to improve the thought of the evangelist by passing it through the mind of Faust. No, said Faust, in the beginning was the deed. Had Goethe written this, Faust, in our age, he certainly would have said, in the beginning was the fact. This fact is the favorite idea of contemporary materialists, the alveole from which they develop an universal, the base and fundament of all that they call truth. How false is it all! Truth is absolute, and only the absolute may be the foundation of human life. Things not absolute are unstable. All else vanishes in the midst of images, which cannot serve as a base. A fact is something by its nature indissolubly bound with the conditions of the material world, and only conceivable thus. But hardly have we tried to detach this fact from its material surroundings, to determine its spiritual principles, to ascertain its true nature. Then we are entangled in the network of proportions, hypotheses, and doubts which arise from the mind of every individual thinker, till we feel our utter incapacity to discern the truth. Hence, history presents such confusion of judgment on events when we try to analyze their spiritual significance. The most conscientious student can do no more than paint a faithful picture of events in their relations to contemporary conditions of life and action, recounting them with their material surroundings, analyzing the causes, effects, and motive principles of historic activity. Here, it is plain, science must seek refuge in art. Thus, all true historians are artists of necessity. For art, an ideal is needed. Consequently, the writers of history, in their appreciation of events and men, must ceaselessly aspire to an ideal, the form of which will be particular to each. All historians are inclined to be carried away by their ideals, that is, by the conceptions which they form of perfection in human motives, acts, and institutions. To events taken together, the historian stands in the position of a critic, and the character of the critic is determined by his general philosophy of life. For this reason, the judgments of historical critics on celebrated persons and events are so various and irreconcilable. Whom one today has exalted, the other tomorrow degrades, while in him whom yesterday history depicted as a monster, tomorrow she finds a pattern of moral excellence. It is unlikely that the differences of historical critics will ever be settled, for the very ideal of their criticism is mutable and changes with every generation of historians. Long before the dawn of pragmatic history, tradition sprang from the depths of the popular imagination, and to the present day continues to develop side by side with history. It serves as a source of history, and as one of the objects of its criticism. But, in addition, it remains the precious heritage of the people, preserving in itself the freshness of immediate impressions. The masses understand and love tradition, and continue to create it, not merely because they incline to the marvelous, but because they instinctively see there a profound truth, an absolute truth of idea and sentiment, a truth which they cannot discern in the subtlest and most artistic analysis of facts. Those heroes of popular song whom history condemns are worshipped still by the people. In them they see the embodiment of its ideals, the ideals of strength, beneficence, and piety, in which, and not in persons, or in the passing images of life, it finds an absolute truth. The learned do not understand that the masses see with their souls, that this absolute truth cannot be seized materially, displayed visibly, determined by numbers and weights, but that it may yet be seen and trusted in. For absolute truth is accessible through faith and only through faith. There is nothing perfect, nothing complete, nothing unique in the actions, the sentiments, or the impulses of men. All things human are of dual nature, and men aspiring to unity totter and fall at every step. To those who analyze every exploit, every event, every historic figure, not one hero will remain. All great deeds are preceded by chains of moral vacillation, surrounded by a network of diverse sensations, impulses, and adventitious circumstances, which direct, modify, and counteract one another, so that investigation leaves not a single deed as the complete expression of a free will directed to an ideal. In the conception of the people, all exploits appear as the complete and living manifestation of strength. Thus the masses judge. Without this faith they cannot live. On faith the life of man sustains itself in the midst of the tears, the regrets, the misfortunes, and the falsehoods with which it is afflicted. Hence the error of those who would deprive the people of their faith, under the pretext of reverence for a pretended historical truth. All men feel the need of faith in some ideal of truth and virtue. But how shall this faith be satisfied if it be not embodied in a living image? To destroy these images is to destroy the faith of which they are the expression, the faith in an absolute truth, in an ultimate perfection. And this faith explains why the favorite readings of the Russian people is those of Lives of the Saints, which are composed of living pictures of heroic deeds, of beneficence, of moral perfection. Each of these hero saints was a man, with all the weaknesses of human nature, the vacillation of thought, of impulse, and of will, with all the baseness of fallen humanity. And if we could analyze his soul, we could see the mystery of original sin, and all the impotence of the man in his struggle with himself. But out of this conflict he issued conqueror, and his conflict was carried on in the name of that high ideal of perfection, the measure of which is not on earth but in heaven, in the domain of the absolute. The heroic deeds of the conflict are painted in living colors by the sympathetic pens of pious chroniclers, inspired to their work by the living love of the same truth, a living aspiration of the same ideal. In such works, the masses instinctively discern the truth and accept it without question, while the skeptical philosophy of the learned agnostic examines facts, thinks to extract from them the material truth, and abjuring the spiritual truth which echoes through every faithful soul, asks the ironical question, what is truth? In the classic myth of Prometheus nailed by Zeus to the Caucasian cliff, we may easily recognize the idea of modern skepticism in contradistinction with the idea of an almighty God, the creator of the universe. It is the protest of the proud soul against the general belief in the existence of God, the negation of that feeling of reverence for Godhead which pride cannot bear, the revolt against submission and adoration of the divinity. It matters little that from Godhead was stolen the sacred fire, which animates, warms, and fructifies mankind. The skeptic cares nothing for this. While enjoying the fire of divinity, he strives to live separate from divinity, as his own master. The Sphinx of ancient fable sat at the crossroads and put a riddle to every passer-by. He who could not solve it was the Sphinx's prey, and disappeared into the pit. Only the wise man who found a solution overcame the monster. What is the Sphinx in our life? Our whole life is an endless chain, a mechanical sequence of phenomena and facts, one succeeding another, one with another uniting, all on their flight bear questions to the human soul. And every instant in the course of time they bring to us the questions of the day. What wisdom do we need to solve them? He who does not possess the wisdom remains the slave of facts and phenomena, the slave of his time, of which he boasts himself the master. On all sides he is crushed by facts. They rule over him, till he becomes a man of vulgar routine, going so far in his blind submission of facts that at last he loses the last gleam of that light which enlightens every being worth the calling of humanity. But when he remains faithful to the highest spiritual impulses of his nature, when he learns to appreciate the fundamental principles of spiritual life, when he firmly takes his stand in the domain of the soul, submitting to no facts but ruling over them, then facts range themselves around him, each in its appointed place. They have not conquered him, for he has conquered them. The Sphinx of ancient Egypt differs from the Sphinx of Greece, although both may have taken to symbolize the mystery of the human soul. The Sphinx of Egypt was a peaceful being, half human, half animal, passing the line of sphinxes before the temples and the royal sepulchres. Man feels the proximity of God and the mystery of death. The Sphinx is a symbol of mysterious contemplation, absorbed in itself and in the idea of divinity. The ancient Egyptians personified in it the divinity of the sunlight. Not such was the Sphinx of the New World, the creation of Grecian fantasy. The Sphinx was a demonical origin, the offspring of the monstrous Typhon and Echidna, the personification not of the bright divinity, but of the dark powers of Tartarus, a being ferocious, predatory, and destroying. In it also is expressed a mystery, not the mystery of inspired contemplation, but the mystery of passionate, denying, violent, and destructive thought. To the present day, this Sphinx has never ceased to set to humanity riddles, terrible, mysterious, and insoluble. The thousands of minds have sought to find a solution of the riddle of life and of religion, but have failed. Each failure to find a solution but precipitates the thought and sentiment into new abysms, and each enigma brings forth hundreds and thousands insoluble as itself. Meanwhile, before our poor humanity gapes the monstrous pit of destruction, wherein each must fall if he does not stand on the rock of simple, unshakable faith and calm contemplation. A great question which never ceases to trouble the conscience of humanity is the absence in human relations of the love and justice preached by Christ, and proclaimed by the Christian Church as the foundations of its doctrine. No human mind has yet found a key to this contradiction, yet no human conscience has escaped disturbance by it. When we consider the endless tale of sanguinary warfare, dissensions, violence, injustice, ignorance, and superstition, in public as in private life, with terror we ask ourselves, Where is the fulfillment of the law of Christ in the hell in which we live and move? How can we escape this tyranny where religion itself appears but as a mirror of falsehood and hypocrisy, a symbol of the contradiction that exists between conscience and action, a curtain of rites and formalities concealing an ensnared conscience, and a pretended justification of injustice? There are indeed the elect, men of justice, the humble in spirit. There are works of charity and of reason, on which our minds may rest for a time. But consider life as a whole. We see authority abusing its mission, the unjust distribution of honor and glory, wealth acquired by rapine overmastering power itself and possessing the earth, insolent lawlessness veiled in external piety, thousands and millions born in sacrifice to the god of war, to the idol of violence and enmity. Finally, we see the innumerable vegetate in insensibility, racked by privation, living and dying in wretchedness. Where is the kingdom of Christ, the kingdom of love and justice? Where is the effective strength of religion? What is the aim and object of our miserable human life? How often have we heard in the past, as we hear today, the proclamation of a golden age for humanity, ending in disillusionment, if not in hopelessness, for the Christian may not abandon hope. The prophets of the Old Testament foretold a future condition of peace and prosperity for the world. Christ bore to earth the commandment of love and peace, but not the realization of his commandment, which would have left no freedom to men. The same commandment brought not peace but a sword, and lit a fire in the hearts of humanity. When, on his resurrection, from hearts inflamed with hope for the regeneration of the world, the timid question rose, Lord, wilt thou at this time restore again the kingdom of Israel? His answer was, It is not for you to know the times or the seasons which the Father has put in his own power. Time measured by little periods among men is infinite to God. To him 1,000 years are as a day, and a day is as 1,000 years. The young Christian church of the first centuries, through persecution and calamity, was sustained by hope for the reestablishment of the kingdom of Israel. This hope for justice on earth was a new force which was borne by Christianity to the joyless pagan world. Then terrible times came when this force seemed to fail, and hope changed into despair. The destruction of Rome by Alaric struck the Christian world with inexpressible terror, and many trusting souls were darkened by doubt. Where was the Christian strength? Where was its salvation? The pagan world cried out, Behold the calamities which this new religion of Christ has brought. And St. Augustine calmed the troubled conscience and revived the hopes of Christendom by his inspired book, The City of God, in which he explained the ways of providence in the history of the world and the infallibility of the Christian teachings on the kingdom which is not of this world. Since then, in times of public calamity and outbreaks of violence and social depravity, how many times has the same question been asked in the Christian world? We live in a time when the dead paganisms come to life again, and raising its head, strives to overcome Christianity, denying its dogmas, its ordinances, even the principles of its moral teaching. Like the pagan philosophers of the past, new prophets with malicious irony turn to the remnant of the faithful with the bitter reproach, See to what a pass your Christianity has brought the world. What is the worth of a religion which has mutilated human nature, stealing from it that freedom and the satisfaction of its desires, which alone constitutes happiness? Can it be possible that that victory which has vanquished the world is to perish at the onslaught of paganism? No, for faith remains. The Holy Church, of which its Creator has said, The gates of hell shall not prevail against it, still holds the keys of truth, and today, as in the past, those who are in the truth shall hear its voice. Through the medium of symbols and images, it maintains the truth, and the power to collect that which is dispersed and to renovate the face of the earth. But he alone, who holds the times and seasons in his hand, knows when that day will come. Meantime, from the day of its foundation, the proud and impatient have not ceased to seek outside the church, and in opposition to it, new gospels to regenerate humanity, to fulfill the law of love and justice, to realize the ideal of peace and prosperity upon earth. Struck by the monstrous inconsistencies between the teachings of Christ and the lives of Christians, They impeach the church and its works. Adjuring an institution establishes the foundation of Christianity, they aspire to replace it by a church of Christ, in their opinion purified, severed from the universal church, and based on their own interpretation of single precepts of the gospel. It is a strange error. Here are men subject to the passion and the sin to which all their fellow creatures are given, men who, in common with all the world, afflicted with a dual nature, condemned to will what they cannot do and to do what they do not will, priding themselves on unity of spirit and taking up the unappointed work of the teacher and the prophet, while all the world, and they together with it, turn around and delude themselves that they stand upon an immovable point. They begin with the destruction of the law, yet they are unable to establish a new law from the scraps and fragments of the teaching which they reject. They deny the church, yet they must needs build a church for themselves, with their own preachers and ministers, repeating among themselves that which they condemned and rebelled against, and the added faults of falsehood and hypocrisy, and an insensate pride which lifts them above the world. The pride of intellect and contempt for men of their own flesh and blood impel them to destroy the old law and establish a new. They forget that the divine master whose name they invoke, being meek and humble of heart, would not change a single word of the law, but inspired each with the spirit of love and charity which he found concealed there. While condemning dogma and ceremony, they themselves end as narrow and masterful dogmatics. Revolting against fanaticism and intolerance, they become the fiercest fanatics and persecutors. Unconsciously, they themselves are corrupted by malice and passion. Blinded by pride, they know not the scandal they bear to the faith, destroying its simplicity and completeness in the souls of those simple ones whom the church has not yet enlightened and taught to know it well. It is easy, but how mad, how iniquitous it is, to seduce a simple soul in which there is a pure, clear field of religious feeling, a soul uncluttered and virgin to the influence of belief. It is sad to think that such souls are approached with confident denial of the church, and persuaded that the church, with its doctrine and mysteries, its symbols, its ceremonies, and its traditions, with its poetry, which is inspired from generation to generation a multitude of Christians, is a false and execrable institution. These souls in themselves are humble. Sectarianism leads them to the heights of pride, while faith decays in the narrow prison of sectarian formulas. There is no soul, however virgin, which cannot be imbued with this insensate pride, this confidence in its own justice, and this before the whole people which constitutes the church, living in humble consciousness of its sinfulness before God, with a humble hope of forgiveness and salvation through the prayers of the church. The fruits of this pride in its ultimate development are known. They are, first, hypocrisy in the pretense of righteousness, then malice and intolerance of all other faiths, and lastly, a passionate desire to lead astray from the church its scattered flock, to attain which end all means are allowable. The church is truly a lifeboat for inquiring minds, tortured by questions of what and how to believe. To start laden with these questions on the shoreless sea of research, doubt, and logical deduction is perilous equally to the narrow mind of man, to his capricious imagination, and to his vanity seeking for a new path. Affirmed in a faith created by himself, abjuring the dominion of the church, he may end by regarding himself as the prophet of a new faith. He may become intolerant and fanatical. A terrible delusion may ensnare him to make faith alone the necessary element of salvation, independent of life and work. Christ, in his terrible denunciation of the scribes and Pharisees of his time, not to them alone uttered a stern word of warning and condemnation. His words should be remembered by all the brainless fanatics of our time, the self-appointed teachers of new religions. Neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ, and will unto you. For ye compass sea and land, and make one proselyte. The Christian church has its teachers, appointed by Christ himself as head of the church. But who has appointed and sent these teachers of new religions? The spirit of vanity and pride has sent them, the spirit of the discord and hatred which they disseminate in men by their teachings. They fancy that by destroying the fence which guards the doctrine of Christ, they will draw the people to the new teaching, which they alone can understand. They speak of love, while in seducing their fellow man from communion with the church, they instill in his heart feelings of pride, of malice, and hatred to his fellows who remain behind. And using an instrument which they themselves have fashioned and named truth, they base their truth on negation of what has been accepted as truth by the church, which they have forsaken. Truth, these prophets tell us, is the most precious attainment of the human soul. And if we be convinced that we possess the truth, shall we remain in inaction when we may communicate it to our neighbors who have fallen away and know it not? But who can assure these self-appointed teachers that this truth is not affirmed merely on personal conceptions and experience? Where is their testimony? Can they maintain that it bears the stamp of divine revelation? Have they a right to proclaim it in the words of the ancient prophets, "Thus spake the Lord"? Their pretended authenticity is nothing better than personal conviction, sincere it may be. If for them this is enough, to their neighbors it is nothing. Have they received commands from above to go into the world with the gospel and teach humanity an inspired religion? Can they show such commands and prove their authenticity? No. So each prophet of a new religion, however irresistible his convictions, must show respect to the convictions of his fellow men. But the fanatic of the new religion will not admit the necessity for this respect. He casts it away as something unworthy of him. He begins his operations, advancing against the stronghold of his neighbor's faith, with intent to destroy all its defenses, bringing to bear at once the whole religious system with which he would replace it. The ancient faith, consecrated by centuries, for those who hold it is the main support of life, and the deeper and sincerer, the firmer its foundations, the more provocative is his attack, the more he is inflamed by desire to destroy it, and on its ruins to raise the religion devised by himself. His aim, in appearance, is constructive, but all his actions are destroying. Having overthrown the ancient edifice, our architect wishes to raise it anew, but he has never reflected how easy it is to destroy and how difficult to rebuild. The ruined building stood on foundations rooted in the depths. The new building must have new foundations in a new soil. With a daring hand, he strives to surpass the immemorial work of the human soul. Who gave strength and authority for this to the destroyer? He has taken his victim and led him whither? Into the wilderness, where 100 sinuous paths diverge, but no straight road is found. Whatever the aim, such is the end of the fanatical religious reformer, the wilderness. The founders of religion, recognizing from the heights of contemplation the idea of Godhead and its relations to man, evolved in conformity therewith an order of rites and ceremonials inspired by that idea. But the mass of the people remains in the valley, and the light of pure contemplation shining above the hills does not reach it at once. To the people, religious sentiments are expressed by a number of ceremonies and traditions, which from the austerest standpoint may seem superstition and idolatry. Religious defenders of the faith, alarmed and indignant, sometimes attempt with violent hand to destroy these external expressions of the vulgar faith, as Moses destroyed the golden calf raised by Aaron at the demand of the people, when the prophet was lost in high contemplation on the summit of Mount Sinai. Thence springs the Puritan zeal of the leaders of religion, passing often to fanaticism. But in this envelope of the popular religion, often rude, are hidden elements of faith, susceptible to development and sublimation, the germs of eternal truth. In tradition and in ceremonial, in symbolism and in custom, the people see the actual incarnation of that which expressed in abstract formula would be neither real nor effective. What if destroying the husk we deadened the kernel of truth? If pulling up the tares, we pull up also the wheat? What if in striving to purify the faith of the people under the pretext of enmity to superstition, we destroy the faith itself? If the forms by which simple men express their faith in the living God repel us, thus remember that it is to us, perhaps, the command of our divine Master was given, Take heed that ye despise not one of these little ones that believe in me." In an Arabic poem, we find the instructive parable of the celebrated teacher Jalal-ad-Din. Once Moses, while wandering in the wilderness, came upon a shepherd who was praying fervently to God. This was the shepherd's prayer: "How shall I know where to find thee? How to be thy servant? How I should wish to put on thy sandals, to comb thy hair, to wash thy garments, to kiss thy feet, to care for thy dwelling, to give thee milk from my herd. For such is the desire of my heart." Moses, when he heard the words of the shepherd, was angered and reproached him. "Thou blasphemest! The Most High God has no body. He wants neither clothing, nor dwelling, nor service. What dost thou mean, unbeliever?" The heart of the shepherd was saddened, because he could not conceive of a being without bodily form and corporeal needs. He was taken by despair and ceased to serve the Lord. But God spoke to Moses and said, "Why hast thou driven away from me my servant? Every man has taken from me the form of his being and the manner of his speech. What to thee is evil, to another is good. To thee it is poison, to another it is sweet honey. To me words are nothing. I look into the heart of a man." The Persian poet Muhammad Rumi, who lived in the 13th century, is the author of the celebrated poem Masnava. It contains some remarkable verses on prayer, which are worthy of a trusting soul. A certain man cried out in the silence of the night, "O Allah!" But Satan answered, "Be silent, thou fool. Thou hast babbled enough already. Thou wilt never hear an answer from the height of the throne, however much thou mayest cry, 'Allah,' and look disheartened." The man's heart was troubled, and he hung his head. Then appeared to him the prophet Qasir, and asked, "Why hast thou ceased to call on God, and repented of thy prayers?" The man answered, "I got no answer from Allah. I heard no voice saying, 'I am here,' and I fear that the gates of salvation are shut against me." Qasir answered, "Thus has Allah commanded me. Go thou to him and say, 'O man, tried by much, have I not commanded thee to serve me? Have I not commanded thee to call on me?' And my reply, 'Here I am,' is the same as thine, O Allah. Thy suffering, thy ardor, and thy zeal, all these are my messages to thee. When thou strugglest with thyself and criest for help, by this struggle and cry I draw thee to myself, and answer thy prayer. Thy fear and thy love are the signs of my forgiveness. And in my words, O Allah, is a multitude of answers. I am with thee."